So when I come to BMCR, I have a lot of, honestly, just fond memories of BMCR, and know that we do have a voice, and it is very important. I just want to also give, I asked Bishop Swanson and Bishop Holston, would they be here? Because we talk all the time. And they are not. And I want to bring you greetings from Bishop James E. Swanson and also Bishop Lewis Jonathan Holston. Both of them, as we speak, are in Dallas, Texas for Connectional Table. And so I told them that I would bring greetings on their behalf. I would also just like to say the power of the connection, Ken. Reverend Chris Cumbus, the Mississippi folks will recognize that name, who is a retired Mississippi pastor, is down in the Western North Carolina working with you all with all the devastation. And when I saw, and I got an email from our disaster person, Reverend Frank Newell, that Chris was going to be with you, I also said again, that's the connection at its best, and we need to do more of that. And I bless God for just being here, and bless God that you asked me last night to preach the communion service. I thank you for that opportunity.
And I have to remember one thing while I'm sitting up here, and that is my wife told me to smile. And the person that's taking the picture said, I smile sometime. I smile sometime. And so that's the one thing I got to remember, because I got to go home with her. But one of the things, my name is Leonard Fairley. I happen to be, I guess I could say still new, Bishop of the South Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. Thank you. And there are a couple of things that I've begun to learn, or that I've begun to take in. And part of them, Brother Carter, is not necessarily rubbish as it is, I would think, a holy moment of spiritual burden, if you can call it that. Because one of the things that I'm certainly aware of is that I happen to serve an annual conference with the largest concentration of African Americans in it, of both pastors and churches. And one of the things that I think when I think about that and listening to all the presentations, particularly Dr. Quick's presentation, if you were here, the one thing that sticks out in my mind is that with rights and freedom comes obligation. And so my burden is, what is that obligation? When I gather in the black church and hear the singing and watch the worship and participate in that, we have something amazing and extraordinary to offer to the world. And if there's anybody who knows what freedom looks like, who knows what that feels like, and who knows what that means, it is those people that have been on the margins. It is those people who have been the lost, the last, and the least. And so my concern and my prayer as your bishop is that I would simply come alongside you. There's so much, and Bishop Carter, I like what you said when you say, well, I'm here to learn. There's so much for me to learn, so much to gather. But gathering that and learning from it brings the obligation of doing something about it. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unhear what you've heard. The next step is action. And so that's my prayer. Now, I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. And so again, I'm grateful to come alongside you and be a part of this journey together. And if there's any time that the world and the nation needs the church, it is now. This is probably the best time to be doing this work. The best time to be doing this work is now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Rivas. I served as a bishop in the Methodist Church of Southern Africa So I'm wondering if anyone from Southern Africa is here this morning, if you'd please stand. Okay, I've got that lonely feeling. Not at all. The reason why I'm in South Carolina actually is Bishop Deese's fault. Her and the Lord called me just over 3 years ago. I mean, I think, to be honest, I'm a recovering racist. I was born in the midst of apartheid, lived through apartheid, benefited from apartheid. Me and my family all benefited from apartheid, and lived a very privileged life, as it was for all white South Africans. I saw the devastation of racism, the complete devastation of stripping people of their humanity. And the worst part is I saw it through the eyes of the church that justified it. It was terrible. But the Lord saved me. And I guess part of that took me to a place where I served as bishop and had a very close relationship to the Mandela family, who God allowed me to minister to and to pastor. As you know, they were Methodists, and was one of those that stood around the grave as they lowered Nelson Mandela's body into the ground, and a great hero of the faith and of the world. And then have the privilege, as we do as of pastors, of being with Winnie Mandela when she breathed her last breath on the Monday after Easter. And a giant of a woman who I think in many ways was a role that's been underplayed. It was because of her that no one ever forgot Nelson Mandela and who he was. It was because of her and her strength that we were able to celebrate him and have him, serve as president of our country. So I was privileged to participate in her funeral service, and only God can bring someone who grew up in the midst of apartheid with all its privileges, serve in the military and the special forces, to be ultimately friends with a giant of a person like Winnie Mandela. It was strange, to say the least, but God knew what he was doing. I remember sitting with her in hospital once, and a whole lot of people came in visiting, including the ex-mayor of Atlanta and a couple of other who were part of the struggle here in the South. And they all introduced themselves to her and what their role in the struggle and their role in the civil rights movement. And I was so fearful, because when they were going to get to me, what was I going to say? I mean, I supported apartheid back in the day. And as they got to me, she put her hand over and held my hand and said, "This is my son." I mean, true reconciliation. It was a beautiful moment. It was a healing moment. So coming to South Carolina, with respect, felt like I've stepped back in time. Segregation in the church here is very real. And it breaks my heart, to be honest with you. I come from a place that struggled through apartheid, and the church is beautifully beautifully integrated. The church that I come from and the churches that I served had somehow figured out what it meant to worship together. See, here we blame it on worship styles. Well, we worship differently. Our style is different to your style. In some ways, I feel like I've got into a time machine and gone back when I stand in the front of my church, 99% white, without any desire whatsoever to make any progress towards reconciliation and integration. So when I asked the mayor of our town to come and worship with us, she said she used to work in the DuPont in our city, and she said she'll come and worship with us. The Saturday night before the Sunday that she was going to worship with us, she called me. She said, "I can't be there, because there's an African-American woman, while I worked in the local plant, when I was given promotion, there were people who spoke to me in the most ghastly of fashions. I can't even tell you what they said to me and what they called me. And those people are sitting in your church today. And I can't get my mind around the fact that they profess their faith in Jesus Christ and yet spoke to me and treated me like they did. There's a disconnect here somewhere. Be that as it may, I'm here. Someone said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And so I'm here. I have no doubt that God has a plan for me. I love being here. I love being in your conference. So I'm ever grateful to you, Bishop Dees, for bringing me over here, I think. No, I am. I definitely am. I'm grateful to be here. I trust God. I believe God. God does a work in us. I've seen it. I'm proof of it. And I've seen him do the work in South Africa and continues to do the work. And I trust God with every part of who I am. That greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. So thank you for allowing me to be here today and to share the stage. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm not moderating this thing, but I just wanted to piggyback off what he said because, I struggled before moving into this role, and I'm struggling even more and looking at all that gray hair. But in response to what Bishop Rivas said, the reality is that MAGA is white backlash. And it's in our churches. Christian nationalism is in our churches. I just found out this week, just recently, the manifesto of the young man who went into that grocery store and shot those customers in that grocery store. Part of his manifesto, you know what was written in there? Onward, Christian soldiers. So I'm not going to sing that hymn anymore. But really, and that's something that we need to acknowledge and deal with, which is what he's dealing with, and many churches are dealing with, especially when it comes to that flag, the American flag. And I dealt with that when I was serving in South Carolina on Hilton Head. They wanted it front and center in the sanctuary, hanging from the rafter, covering up the cross. My friends, it's real. And if we're not speaking to that, if we're not helping our congregations understand what is going on in the church and do everything we can to eradicate it, now understand. I understand that now I am considered Pharaoh just like the rest of these folks, And as we used to say whenever we got a new bishop, we'd say, uh-oh, here's another Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. We said that in South Carolina, but I'm saying the church needs Josephs. And we have to speak to this racism. And I know the days of hooping are over. People sitting in the pews want to hear the gospel of a Jesus who was against nationalism. They want to hear that. They even want to hear that in the black church, because we have to move in white spaces as black people, and we know this. Every day of the week, and on Sunday, we want some hope when we step back out there on Monday. And so those of you who are pastors sitting in here, if you're not speaking to those issues that are right now inundating us as a society, then we have to go back and question our call. Because I have a problem. I love Bishop Carter because he opens his heart and mind to hear and learn and listen. But not every white bishop is like that. That's why I love him, because he's willing to have those hard conversations. But my friends, we are called, I just don't agree with paying people to be advocates. Hell, every one of us are advocates. By the mandate of the gospel, we are called to this work to raise hell where we need to raise hell. The problem is we're not raising hell in the right places. I know I'm Pharaoh.
But one of the things you said that's important for us to do, how many of us in this room could name as clearly what this bishop has named for us? How many of us have the courage and the boldness to name that? Because unless we name it and whispering in a room over here and a room over there, that ain't gonna get it. And it's not left up to paid persons to do that. As Bishop Deesa said, it's not left up to them. And so we have to name the thing. We have to name it for what it is. And again, like I said, once you name it, you don't have the luxury of not doing something about it. That's not a luxury. I was talking about Amari earlier when I came in. I said I was sitting in the back while he was teaching. And what I saw in him was a passion. He was dancing while he was talking. And even though I couldn't see his eyes, I knew his eyes were dancing. And God needs our eyes, our hearts, our minds, our souls to do this dance of justice and love and salvation and redemption and reconciliation. And friends, we better do it with all that we have.
Just the one question that I've asked since I've got here is, I've been involved in some organizations that have tried to work through transformation. So this is a question that I might be able to ask here. Why is it always the African American church and organizations that are seeking reconciliation? So every organization, I was part of the MLK movement in Kershaw County, the African American Cultural Movement, the Concerned Citizens of, and they keep on putting up these events, and we do a Juneteenth event in Camden, and there's all these organizations that are pushing and are holding workshops on transformation, on all the rest of it, and every single one of those organizations that I've certainly been invited to or been part of have been pushed and organized and from an African American perspective and leadership. One thing that confuses me is I don't see anything coming from the white component saying, we are actively seeking reconciliation, so we are doing X, Y, and Z. It baffles me, to be honest. I don't understand it. In a sense, the wronged are the ones wanting to make it right. That makes sense.
Yes.
And the perpetrators, in my mind, are sitting back going, we're loving having you all come to us and seek reconciliation. For me, and I've got some thoughts on it, which I'll share whenever, some other time, but it is something for me that's very, very clear of who are the groups of people in my mind that are pushing for reconciliation, and it's not the perpetrators.
Bishop, of course, I'm not white, of course. But I want to share something with you that was said to me by my district superintendent when I was in the North Georgia Conference. I was in a cross-racial congregation. I was their first African American in 50 years. They were chewing up and spitting out pastors. It was a clergy killer church. It's no longer, I'll tell you privately, but they're closed, and they closed before this affiliation. And so the reason why I say they were chewing them up, they were chewing up pastors and spitting us out. I was its 12th pastor in 50 years, but 2 pastors had served a total of 26 years. Okay, so do the math. And so when I was there, I'll give you this, it was at the corner of Powers Ferry and the 120 Loop in Marietta. So it was in a very, very, very diverse area, okay? And when I was there, people started joining. that looked more like me. And my district superintendent one day came to worship, and I saw out the corner of my eye a bunch of my members that were Anglo just kind of accosted the man. And then afterwards, we had a conversation. And so I was, he said, I'll talk to you later. And so he said, Sharman, you're doing a great work. There's just one problem. And I said, what's the problem? He was like, the church is tilting. And I said, excuse me? And it's tilting blacker. And it wasn't just black individuals were joining. Literally, everybody was joining. I was blessed. Blacks were joining. Latinas was joining. Asian Americans, because right there on that corner. And so we got into a conversation, as you're talking about reconciliation and transformation and talking and everything. And I said, of course you know that I'm dealing with racism here, right? And of course he said yes. And I said, well, give me some wisdom. Give me some wisdom. How do I meet them halfway? He said, the one thing that you've got to realize, they don't think they're racist.
I've been told that. Absolutely.
You said you've been told that, yeah. They don't think they're racist. And then he said this. He said, and you must understand as a white man, and I was there in 2004 to 2007, I had to think. I was there from 2004 to 2007. And he also said this. He said, number one, they don't think they're racist. Yes, they have a problem with you, but when I came to do a consultation, I asked them, do you want another white man or do you want a good pastor? So who's going to say to a district superintendent, oh, by the way, we want another white man? You're going to say we want a good pastor. And so he said, I got one. Her name is Sharma Lewis. And I'll never forget, one of the young adults said to me after I got there, you could have heard a rat, pee on cotton, because it got so quiet when he said that. He also said this, they do not know that they're racist, but he also said this, and in 2004, it is very unpopular to be racist. Keep that in your mind. And that stuck with me the whole time I was there in those 3 years. But I will say, it still didn't stop me from trying to bridge the gap. Now, the thing that was also kind of scary is that as different cultures were joining and we were doing work, see, we have a good thing that when we go into cross-racial appointments, that our brothers and sisters, our Anglo brothers and sisters will say, oh, we need to be intentional. But there's no intention. It's good to say it. And so I was always trying to, because I think it is honestly in the DNA of an African American to try to bridge that gap. It's just in us. It's in us. And so I just had to learn from my district superintendent that there were some folks who didn't want me there. I knew that. They did not want to call themselves racist or privileged. As he said, it was not popular. And so it was just kind of good to get a perspective, because I'm kind of like you. Why do I always need to reconcile when you're the one who's doing it to me? So that's just my little knowledge and my experience.
Thank you. So I'll try to just reflect maybe to a couple of the thoughts, one kind of indirectly. And some of this relates to, of course, this election, some coming out of the General Conference, and every context is different. So having served in Florida and now Western North Carolina, both states are what are called battleground states or swing states. The lawsuits that were brought against both conferences, more than 100 lawsuits in each state. The attorney for the firm who brought them is a Fox legal analyst. And all of this is public. And someone explained this to me in terms of why in those states and not other states. That's a part of it. It was to destabilize United Methodist churches for a political purpose. And so we went through all that, and a little bit of that is still going on here years later. And so that's some of the background. I'd also say, as I was doing consultations last year with Cabinet, several people mentioned an anxiety and fear about the coming election season. And I would say, this is something I've said in many other places, the black church, my observation, knows how to navigate political spaces. The predominantly Anglo church does not. The mainline church does not. The more conservative evangelical church does. So what we've ended up with is a kind of a silent mainline church among the United Methodist and Presbyterians and others. The black church, I don't think, I'm not an authority on the black church, but you don't have the luxury of that. And as I have known and listened to and been taught by black pastors, and I would say Zan Holmes is one of those, he told me one time about how and why he got into politics in Texas and served a large church. How does the United Methodist Church do that? Now, after the disaffiliations, many of the churches who left, the supermajority, left for what I consider to be very political purposes. And all you have to do is drive through the places where they are. It was a predominant, that was the phenomenon. And the political commercials going on right now are very similar to the email these churches got. They are the same things about drag queens and other things. And so in Western North Carolina, we decided to develop something that we called the Purple Church Initiative. Now, my experience has been our black churches, we have 82 black churches, really have not needed it. So when I hear them talk about it, they appreciate it, but they really don't need it. They know how to do this. You know how to do this. That's for me, that's an affirmation. You know how to do this. And I've been in worship services at election time in black churches where you do this really well. So the themes in the Purple Church Initiative, and it was an acknowledgement in the state of North Carolina, which is a very close political equation, that we needed to speak. And so the themes have been equality. Every person is created in the image of God. Every person has a right to vote. It has been to advocate for voter expansion and to criticize voter suppression. It has been about nonviolence and calling out Christian nationalism, and sermons have been preached on this, and I've preached on it as well during this space. Interestingly, the 2 Sundays after the hurricane, I preached in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and Shelby, North Carolina, both places greatly affected by the hurricanes. In Spruce Pine, the paraments were purple. They were going through the Purple Church Initiative in their county. And these are 2 very politically red counties. In both of these churches, I met the Democratic chairpersons of those counties who are members of those churches. And in both of those churches, that people thanked me for having a language to enter into that political space. We don't have the luxury in our country to do this. And I would just say, a mentor said to me recently, leaders have to talk about what they're doing and why, and not assume that people know it. So we thought that in 2020 we were in a crisis in the national political election. So we did two things. One, in Florida, Bishop Adam Richardson and I found the funding to run a full-page ad in every major newspaper in Florida. 3 weeks before the election, talking about white supremacy and voter suppression. It was in the Miami Herald, the Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa. We found the funds outside of the apportionments. Bishop Richardson is the bishop of the AME Church. And the Council of Bishops developed a public teaching statement on faith and democracy and the right to vote. And over 90 U.S. bishops signed it. It's the first time we've ever done something just in the United States because we felt like we were in a crisis. And the last thing I would say is in western North Carolina, you can drive along I-40 and you see two Confederate flags. And so the Episcopal bishop and I got together and we found the funds to put up 2 billboards where those flags are. And they say, hate divides, love unites. And there's a black hand and a white hand. And it says the people of the United Methodist Church, the people of the Episcopal Church. Now that's a public witness, and we have to now live into that public witness. It's not sufficient. It's not everything, but I can never know what you feel like driving by those symbols of hate. And so I would just say those are some ways the church can do that. And many people have been a part of these things. And I just will end by saying the black church, you are just the teacher on how to integrate, someone said spirituality this morning, and faith and political life, because lives are at stake. And so thank you.
And Ken, I'd just like to, when you started talking, you mentioned, well, the African American church, they know how to do this. And sometimes the question is the dominant culture willing to learn from the African American church? Are they willing to learn from marginalized people? When you've had a dominant culture that's been in power forever, I mean, what I would consider forever, who feel like they got the answers to everything. And one of the answers that we have is to take back our country and take back our church. With an unwillingness to learn from people who know what it's like to have nobody to depend on except for God. That's a voice you need to listen to. One of the things that happened to me, and I'll share this story, and Bishop Ken and Sharma, you know this story, is one of the most liberating moments for me, but it was also one of the most trying moments. Right around the time when the whole issue around George Floyd and all the killings, we decided as a college to write a letter in reverse of the letter that Bishop Harmon and some people signed to Dr. King while he was in jail, that prompted him to write the letter to a Birmingham jail. So we're sitting in a college meeting, And I'm going, well, we need to say something. And I never will forget these words. Well, Bishop Farrell, you write well. Why don't you write it? That's like saying he's well spoken. That's the truth. As a black man. And I can remember one of our colleagues stopped us in the middle of that time and said, did you hear what he said? And they decided to help me. And we wrote it. And all the white bishops signed it. And we put that letter together. But it's like your question. Why is it always the marginalized? Why is it always people that are oppressed? When will others join? And until that happens, we're going to continue to have this thing about white nationalism. We're going to continue to have all these racial problems because we are the ones. Alice Walker writes a book called We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting On, Inner Light in Times of Darkness. And so when is the dominant culture going to be willing to learn from us? When is the dominant culture going to be willing to offer resources to help us be the teachers that we know that God has called us to be? Power. Power. I'm not going to let you teach me anything.
Because it goes back to it always goes back to power and privilege. I don't care however you spin it, it always goes back to power and privilege. And I agree with you. When will our Anglo brothers and sisters allow themselves to be, I'll even use this word, vulnerable, and to surrender? But then what's always interesting that I find is that we will have our clergy brothers and sisters, our Anglo clergy brothers and sisters, when you say sin is racism, they'll get upset. Our Anglo brothers and sisters. When I was in Virginia for 6 years and George Floyd happened, and I wrote a pastoral letter to the conference. You would have thought I had cursed out everybody's mother that was white. And the letter was CC'd to the governor and the attorney general. And I was vilified because at that point, folks in the conference were saying, why are you bringing the governor and the attorney general into this? That's not their issue. But the bottom line is, as much as we say we separate church and state, we can't. We really can't. We know that, but it always seeps through. And so people were very upset that I wrote a pastoral letter of us as an annual conference dealing with it and trying to come together. And even while I was in Virginia, I dealt with the KKK while I was in Virginia. That's how I have to this day a relationship with the Attorney General, Mark Herring, because getting threats in churches, KKKs were putting paraphernalia on black churches. While the black churches was in church, they would come out to see paraphernalia, and they knew it was a black church. I'll never forget also on the Eastern Shore where a group of KKKs took a Sealy bag, put paraphernalia in it, and threw in the yard of this black daycare about KKK. And so I was in Virginia from 2016 to 2022, and I'm dealing with the KKK in 2018, 2019. So we need to always know that racism, and we know this, is still live. It's alive, and in the worst places, because I am a new bishop getting calls from a black pastor to tell me that she goes out to her car to see that the KKK, while she's in there worshiping, putting paraphernalia, which is, again, another scare tactic. So we got work to do.
So we want to open it up for you all to have some dialogue with us. So if there are questions from the floor, we just ask that you get a mic and we'll respond in kind.
Can I just say quickly before the first question, I think the issue for me is when I got to where I was in Camden and the first Black History Month came and I suggested we do a book, well, to celebrate Black History Month, which was, I didn't realize would be such an issue. When I asked the congregation to read the cross and the lynching tree, well, I realized I'd gone for a bit of a, I thought it would be a good idea to do a book study during Black History Month. It was then that I was told that there's no racism that exists. Racism doesn't. So it doesn't exist in the area that I'm in. So if you can't, and this is, I'll be quick. And so if you can't even get to the point of, because that's not even, there's other stuff to discuss. There's DEI, there's reparations, now if you can't even start at the place of going, racism doesn't, how do you even begin a conversation around DEI or reparation or anything like that if you can't even get past the first step of the conversation? It's almost like those other conversations. Anyway.
Good morning. I'm Henry Bush from North Georgia, and I too was at, before my present appointment, was at a cross-racial appointment for about 20 years. And the interesting thing about being at that cross-racial appointment was that when I got there, there were only 12 people there, and the next Sunday it dropped down to 5. And then for lack of a better term, the white church around the corner would refer black people to my church and tell them you might be more comfortable there. And this was in this current century. It was not years and years ago that it was there. And the interesting thing that I found out that my 2 district superintendents at the time, who happened to be white, were extremely supportive until another one came in, and I don't want to call any name, who was less supportive and more intentional about doing things to undermine the system. Everything, and I'm a local pastor. I'm not in seminary or did not go to seminary because that DS told me at the time, and I'm only 57, told me that I was entirely too old to be thinking about seminary, and so I became comfortable in myself. But what I guess my question is to our African American bishops and to the bishops, what are we doing to recruit younger African American clergy? Because the survival of our church, and I just wanted to, we talk about Black Church Methodist for renewal, the Black church is not dying. It's not dying. It's just dying in the United Methodist Church. And so the question I raised for our bishops, what are the intentions about recruiting African American and younger African American men and women to come into the church? Because I was told point blank, I'm not supposed to be talking about political things from the pulpit. And then you see at the other church, the other pastor calling Obama a demon and the Antichrist. So those are the kind of questions. But the question is, what are we doing to recruit younger African Americans?
First of all, nobody's stepping into this rubbish, this shit. I mean, let's be honest. And how has the Black church even attracted young people in the United Methodist Church? I mean, let's be honest, that we have not done our work. This is not on someone else, this is on us. You know, I keep saying, why do I keep coming to these things after I've been told I'm a Kaya? And I never have a good word, but you know, what is it? Weary from the weight of awareness. And I'm just weary from the weight of awareness. But with everything that has been going on, The people who are outside of the United Methodist Church sees MAGA. It sees Christian nationalism. What do you mean? Why they're not? What are we doing to attract them? I wouldn't want them to come in the state that we are in right now until there's some healing that has taken place. They're not attracted to us. They don't want to be a part of a church that's fighting over what we're fighting, and they've moved on, my friends. They're not attracted until we get our shit together. And that's the reality, and we have not done that. And this is what I've learned from a farmer, that you can take rubbish and use it for fertilizer to grow some strong crops. And until we learn to do that, they will not be attracted to us. So I get passionate about this because when you ask those questions, I'm saying to myself, come on, y'all. You're asking us. You are the ones who are in the local church. That's where our mission gets fulfilled. You have more power than you think you have. That's right. Because the white church has shown us that and they have told us, we have a choice. We can make a choice to be with you or not. And they made that choice. Now, with the remnant that is left, what are you going to do? Yeah. This is not on us. I'm sorry. It's on you all as pastors and laity. What is your local church going to be about? Because we can't do that work sitting where we sit. You can do it where you sit. And that means educating laity, empowering them. I mean, getting out in communities. We're not even out in communities. We don't live in the communities we're called to serve in. Let's be honest. When you live 30 miles away because you want to stay in your house, you don't want to live in a parsonage if you haven't already torn it up. I'm just calling it like I see it. Don't be talking about what you don't have. What you've had, you've destroyed. Or you're destroying. So we've got to hold each other accountable. And you have to hold your colleagues accountable. But you're asking us that question. We need to be asking you that question.
And one of the things she said, I said I'm putting my mic down. She already she already said it. But it does go back to just this whole piece around obligation. You are the ones. You're it. We can't appoint people unless you're raising them up. Unless you're doing your job. We can't be what we're supposed to be. I think Martin Luther King Jr. had it right. We can't be what we're supposed to be unless you are what you are supposed to be. I can remember the way that I even got recruited in this church, and Albert Schuler knows this. Bishop Bethea. He was a district superintendent in North Carolina. He came looking for us. And he worked through this organization, BMCR, to help do what Robin just said for us to get our act together. And I never will forget, 4 of us got ordained at the same time. Me, Eldrick, Howard Anderson, and Edie Gleaves. And we went to Dr. Bethea and we said, now, Dr. Bethea, what is the church going to do with us? And he said, that's not your problem. You've done the work. You've been faithful to your call. It's the church's job. It's your job. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And if it's going to get better, it starts here. If we're going to have the kind of people to deploy into these churches to deal with white nationalism, to deal with whatever ism is out there, they're coming from your churches. And I can't appoint what I don't have.
And if I could just add maybe something systemic that I would say I can do, and that is in Florida, we did establish a scholarship in honor of Geraldine McClellan at Gammon. And that was precisely so that persons did not go into debt who were called, who were raised up by your churches. And in Western North Carolina Conference the last few years, we have supplemented the salaries of what I call our three black anchor churches in our three largest cities. And that is so that persons do not leave those feel like they need to leave those churches for economic reasons to do something different. And the next phase of that was we started an associate pastor position in one of those three churches last year. Another associate pastor will begin this summer. And so I believe there's some systemic things the system needs to do to send a signal, I'm just speaking for myself, that we will meet you halfway. Does that make sense? And because in my chair, I have to do what I can do, totally honoring there's some things I cannot do.
I'll quickly answer. What we are having conversation and doing in Mississippi is not recruiting from seminaries, but going to recruit from colleges, like a Philander, like a Russ, because I am a firm believer that there are people sitting in colleges, camps, Wesley foundations that have the call, that have the desire. But if we don't go to them, we will never be able to recruit. Now the other thing, and I was on the GBHEM study commission, our process is so long. That is a conversation that on that study commission, we debated over and over and over. When I came through, it was 10 years. I think now it may be 7 or 8 still. It's still a long process. And the study commission, we study that. How do we take our process and make it shorter? Because our other brothers and sisters, Baptists, whatever, if they're going to seminary, and if they have a process, it's not as long and lengthy as ours. So that's what we're doing.
I would like to respond to what you just said, Bishop Sharma. Bishop Robin, I love your direct approach. I was just sharing with somebody, my filter is completely broken. I'd be like wanting to cuss out kids and everybody in the store and all of that, because these people that just walk in front of you and all this stuff don't say anything. Filter's gone, so I appreciate that. I have a couple questions. I want to respond to what you just said about recruiting. I am ordained Baptist, but I served as a licensed local pastor in United Methodist Church, and the process that you're talking about, where I served, the conference was intentionally looking outside of Methodism to bring diversity, but also to equip churches with pastors who have been seminary trained as well. And what we found, because it was almost like a class of us that came in at the same time to help supply the churches. What we found was the worst thing about it was the process. When we were asked if we were interested or would consider being ordained in the Methodist Church, we were told that we had to start from the beginning, which was discerning your call. Now, I have been in ministry for 10 years. I'm in ministry for 10 years. You appoint me to your local church, but then I have to start at discerning my call. I'm like, that doesn't match. And on top of that, if you did decide to enter the process, the years that you served as a licensed local pastor did not count toward the probationary period. So it was very disheartening. So all of us that I know that served in the Methodist Church left because we're not going through that. We went through an interview process. We've done all this, and you trusted us to put us in a church, but now we can't If we wanted to be ordained, like you said, 7 years, come on, So I don't know where the Methodist Church is at large with that conversation, but I would say to you bishops and those who work on the various committees, and you talk about recruiting the young people, that they're not going to go through that even if they are discerning their call, because in the Baptist Church, the ordination process is nowhere near that long. Between getting licensed and being ordained, it really depends on the discernment and where you are in your ministry and so forth. So I would just encourage you all to also look at that while we're talking about these other concerns of the church. But as a body of Christ in general, and when we're talking about the racism, I think that there are some of us, like you say, getting in the communities, there are some of us that have to be more willing to get in the fight and not to just be on the sidelines. I served in a white Presbyterian church, and my role was the business administrator, which in essence was pretty much like an executive pastor. So I had oversight of all of the church, the facilities, administration, finances, everything but the actual ministries, where there were associate pastors who had different responsibilities. And I went there kind of naive. I'm like, oh, we're serving God together. And the pastor who wrote a letter and brought pastors together, white pastors in the city with George Floyd, he was very intentional. He wanted to bring someone in. He was praying for that because he knew that if they wanted their church to be diverse, they had to have somebody that looked like those people in leadership. So I was the first African American, male or female, in a leadership position in the history of that church. All of the people before me that served in my role were white men. And so the pastor wanted to do that. The people said they wanted it, and they were very loving and welcoming. They really were, until we wrote a letter about the insurrection, and then, the bottom kind of fell out then. But it was the staff. There were 2 white female associate pastors who did not have the years of experience I had or the credentials that I have. And I had a 30-something-year-old female questioning everything I did as if I reported to her. And that's when I realized that this is a fight. This is not just me going to serve on staff and fulfilling my call, and it was all of that, but at the same time, I realized that part of the purpose for me being there was to address those kinds of things head on, and to not shy away from saying, no, wait a minute. No, I've got 10, 15 years experience. No, wait a minute. I'm the one with the doctorate, not you. And I didn't want to be like that, but sometimes they force you to come out and really just call the roll on who you are. And every leadership meeting we had, I had to check this person and remind her, your lane is worship, my lane is administration. You don't tell me what to do. You don't tell me things like, oh, well, I didn't know that. Well, why would you know? That's not part of your job. So, I think really just being willing to confront it. Now, it almost took me out. I'll have to admit, after 2 years, the pastor that hired me retired. They brought in an interim pastor who was just as bad as those associates. So it really got crazy. And I asked the Lord if I could be released, and I resigned. I felt like there was nothing else left for me to do. It was time to go. And, but getting in the fight and understanding that we may not see the change in the situation, but being willing to confront it head on so that we can leave a mark, because there's going to come a time when they're going to remember or think about how they treated someone or the experience that they had. So that was a kind of long way around what you were saying, but I just think that sometimes we have to be willing to get in the fight.
I have two quick points I want to make. Two quick things I'd like to share. One of the things I've said as a college pastor, as a chaplain at a United Methodist institution, to United Methodist pastors, especially those who attended Gammon Seminary in Atlanta that we share a dinner with at annual conference each year, you send me your students, I'll send them to you. I have put about 8 or 10 students through seminary. About 6 or 8 of those have gone to Gammon. And it's difficult to get United Methodist churches to send students to black colleges. And I feel some type of way about that. Because it used to be that's the way I got there. The church sent me to Wiley College. I graduated. I went to seminary. Now, they were angry with me about going to Colgate-Rochester, but I went to Colgate-Rochester because Gardner Taylor and Gaylord Wilmore and other folks were there, and James Cone was on the way. But in any case, I went for that reason. But we need to deal with that fact. We need to send our students to our black colleges. If you're going to send Payne College $100 or $1,000, it's a wonderful gift. We can use it. In fact, you might do that today. But the other thing that's important is if you send us a student, you send us thousands of dollars, because that student will come with whatever scholarships and grants and other kinds of resources that are possible. And Dollars for Scholars will pay, if you send $1,000 to the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, or to the United Methodist Higher Education Foundation, $1,000 will end up being $4,000 for that student at a United Methodist school. Please, please, please send us your students and send $1,000 with them so that we can afford that student can have $4,000 in scholarship money on top of what they have. One last thing. I've heard a lot, and pardon me, I'm a retired active pastor in the church. So I'm out of school in terms of what's happening in the life of the church, especially with the disaffiliation and the money that these churches were supposed to pay once they disaffiliated. My question is, what percentage of those funds are being used to help strengthen black colleges and black churches and black ministries across the church? I'm just saying, help me.
Good question. None of it. I'm just saying, none of it.
Check. Because I do want to be heard. I'm going to read my question, but I have a lot of statements. Maybe I need to do that first. Because when we talk about our system, we need to look at our system, because when we only send a predominantly white group to recruit young talent from seminary, you get what you look like. I wanted to say that. My instead of putting the best talent so we can have the best ministry, best leadership, best team leading us so we can make the United Methodist Church God's church again.
I will just say a comment. If we are really honest with ourselves, a lot of our churches that disaffiliated had nothing to do with LGBTQIA.
And let me say just a little bit
Yeah.
about, the monies from disaffiliation, even in North Georgia. I want to remind you all that being rich is not a substitute for being vital. And and I'm talking about our denomination. I mean, we're not vital. Just as black churches are not vital. And so it doesn't matter. I mean, even no matter how much money each annual conference has, it's not going to last for 50 years, or more. I'm just being honest, The whole notion, even with apportionments. I mean, many of our churches weren't praying apportionments long before disaffiliation, long before direct billing. We weren't. We weren't talking about money. We weren't talking about stewardship because our stuff was rubbish as leaders. And I know because I stepped into so many churches to teach and talk about what it means to put God first in your giving. And I couldn't get the commitment from the clergy to keep it going because they were not there. And we keep asking about money, and what are you going to do with it? Do you even have a plan for that money? And I'm just asking the questions because I haven't seen or heard any of that. We bitch and moan all the time in these gatherings, but we never come forth with a plan for the next 5, 10, 15 years. I'm just waiting to hear that. We do programming, but we don't do church development. Kia Hillman is here, and we've been talking about that. Programming, taking people to a museum in the Pettus Bridge is good, but that's not black church development. How many of you know how to read a financial statement? That's church. We need to learn how to do just the basic stuff and to help our laity learn just the basic stuff. How many of us have become like the white church who have chosen charity over justice? I mean, so I'm just asking the questions. I mean, I'm not looking for an answer, but there are some things that we need to discuss, and there's some work that we need to do. I mean, and there's some stuff that we have messed up. But the question is, where do we go from here? I don't care about cross-racial appointments. I think they were the worst thing. They were the worst plan. They weren't done correctly. They sent us into churches that are just about ready to close. Because no white person wanted it, And very seldom did any of us turn those churches around. We were taken out of them and reappointed somewhere else, or we went on the cabinet or what have you. But I'm just saying, so I'm not a supporter of cross-racial appointments because they have not been done well. But what I am a supporter of is creating new faith communities that include all people. So black folk need to start interrogating scripture to understand what it means to welcome all, including LGBTQIA. And I'm saying we have not touched that yet. And young people are not attracted to us until we're ready to deal with it because they're going to come with questions that we're not equipped to answer.
James Friday, President serving as the Director of Congregational Development for the Conference. Bishop, a little clarity on a statement earlier about the work of us, almost versus the work of the episcopacy. I'm curious
think I'd like to respond. Others will. So initial response to that would be, I was thinking about a sentence as I was driving here. It's a sentence I've heard recently. It's a sentence that I really like. And the sentence is, what we have in common is more important than what separates us. And the person I've heard say this sentence on a number of occasions is Vice President Harris. I like this sentence, and I hope it can be true in this season. I believe the way I would frame this sentence for myself, and this is not a dominant theme of BMCR, it's more of a muted theme. It needs to be more of a muted theme. But the way I interpret that is the connection. So our largest investment in a new church is in a new black church. And I believe the 640 churches who have contributed to this, they believe that what we have in common is more important than what separates us. That does not need to mute anything that is being said. And one of my hopes that grows out of that sentence is the election coming up. And one of my hopes for this is, I believe when we use the word we, and for 10 years I sat at tables with people who wanted to dissolve the United Methodist Church. And I realized, had this church been dissolved, the most vulnerable would have been the most harmed. So a program like Dollars for Scholars would no longer exist. Do you understand that? But people wanted to dissolve it. It was a petition in St. Louis in 19. And so what I hope is, we are a different church than in 16. We are a different church than in 19 or 20 or 23. And the work I would say people who look like me need to do is be a different church than those churches. Amen? Amen. And so the word we, I realize, is always a contested word. Who is we? I don't know. But I hope there is truth in that sentence, that what we have in common is more important than what separates us. So every person who's a United Methodist has a stake in starting new black churches in places like Mecklenburg and Guilford County in North Carolina. We had a gathering of our conference, BMCR, this week. And the conversation got to be about churches that support BMCR or churches that do not. Does that make sense? And our response was, every church in our annual conference supports BMCR. Everyone does. And we should, for many reasons. And so the connection, it is collaboration, and I would say for people like me, at my best, I'm doing a lot more listening and learning than imposing. So I appreciate this question, and the intention may have been for someone else as well.
And Brother Friday, I think that's where you begin with that statement. I do think that what we've done, because you can go out across a local church and you start talking about the conference, it's not, it creates another wall of division. It's not about we anymore. And I always ask people, well, who do you think the annual conference is? Do you think it's the people that's up here in this building? And then I say, no, it's you. You know, you can't say the annual conference without the local church. And as you said, you can't even talk about BMCR unless the whole church. Unless you're talking about the church. You're talking about the whole church. And so I think the word we, I was in a CFA meeting here in South Carolina a little bit ago, and the chairperson of CFNA, I would say, now you all have got to do this. And he said, when are you going to stop saying you and start saying we?
May I just follow up? I think that is important. When we hear that, we and us together, I think that's really important. And the thing that holds us in common is Jesus, who we follow. Whether we are black, whether we are white, whether we are whatever, that's the common factor. And the power of the Holy Spirit that moves us into those communities that may not be like us, but is us. And so I think that's really critically important, that we have a sense that there is a collaborative partnership between whether it's the Episcopal, whether it's the district, whether it's the local church, and all the communities. So that was the reason I asked the question, because I wanted you to unpack that a little bit, because when people hear it's your responsibility versus our responsibility, it sends a mixed message. So thank you for responding.
My question is, are we putting our best efforts and resources and energy into the right place? And what I mean by that is this. God had to let the stiff-necked, hard-hearted people die in the desert so that what went into the promised land was new and fresh, ready to believe, obey, and persist, Bishop. So, would we be better served to pay attention to our children? Because when I go into my grandson's daycare, they're all playing together, and they're not concerned about anybody's skin color, about anybody's gender. And we keep trying to change that person in this bad relationship that is never going to change. And I'm wondering if we are paying attention to the big things. See, there's a reason that books are being banned from classrooms. There's a reason that we focus on the Supreme Court when all the lower court judges are being put into place. There's a reason that we look at the shiny things because somebody's always pointing to that, but the termites are eating the house. Are we focusing on the right things and putting our energy and seeking God for wisdom as to what we need to be doing? Because our children, their minds are moldable and ready to change. Us, not so much. We are in our ways, and it's going to be hard to change us. We can have an inflection point, but it's going to take a lot of energy to do that. So maybe we get out into the community and out of the pew. Maybe we get out and start working with the children and put something in there that's going to change the world. And I just believe that God is calling us to think different and to have a different spirit, because only Caleb and Joshua said we can take this thing and we can do this, but they had a different spirit. And if we have a different spirit, we can be able to step into the promise, but we're just not going to wait for the promise to come out and get us. We got to move forward, and it's with our children. And if you look at our churches, the least amount of attention that we pay is to our children. If you look at our community, we don't go to school board meetings. We don't go to county council. So what are we doing? We're hoping for something to be given to us when God has gifted us to be able to mobilize and do what we need to do. We can have all the resources in the world, but if we don't do anything with them, the moth will eat it and they will be gone.
Amen.
And that's all I
I want to come full circle of a conversation I had yesterday with, I don't know if George is still in here, he may have walked out. When I was in North Georgia, I had a wonderful opportunity for 3 years to be at Wesley Chapel. And in those 3 years, God just blew up the church in such a positive way. And in 3 years, we grew over 600 members. And people always ask me, how did you do it? And I said, it wasn't me, it was a we, it was us. But one of the things I will say about Wesley Chapel, and this is what I always have said, and they've heard this, I feel that within the Methodist Church, we have forgot our mission. We're not making disciples. We're not. Whether you're black church, white church, we're not. In Mississippi, we have lost over 400 churches. Only 12, if one will vote, because we still allow to leave in 2549. We have only lost 12 out of the 400. And so we in Mississippi, we're trying to turn the corner. Since I've been there, I've been trying to ask, every time I talk, I always say, can we change this narrative from disaffiliation to discipleship? And doing our research in Mississippi, we have discovered that we have 2 million people in the state of Mississippi that do not have a relationship with Jesus Christ. They are not in anybody's church. They may not even own a Bible. So my comment to my annual conference is I have a passion. And George Ashford asked me this, how did you grow? Prior to me coming to Wesley Chapel, there is a strip little area, there's an apartment complex, there's a subdivision. They never went into any of that. And I said to George, I said, first of all, I don't ask anything of anyone that I wouldn't do. So I was out there with the evangelism team trying to expose them to the church that was literally right across the street that they had never been in. I have a passion for the lost. I have a burden that I want people to know Jesus, because I know that when you know Jesus, your life changes. And I think in all of our churches and in the United Methodist Church, we've lost that passion. We've lost the passion to tell someone about the goodness of the Lord. Yeah. And I know anytime that y'all have heard me up here, I'm always saying that. Because the bottom line is, where would we be if there was no Jesus? Where would all of us be? And the church is the place. Outside the church is the place. The other thing I will say is that it's a new day. It is a new day. We got to think differently. We got to figure out how to get into our communities. We got to be taught. George and I had a conversation about even our pastors got to be coached how to do things differently. The old way, nobody is coming to a Methodist church with a UMC sign out front. We don't even know our community. I've also said this, that if your church disappeared tomorrow, would anybody miss you? But the thing about it is, I'm hopeful. I am hopeful that in the United Methodist Church, we can grow again. We just have to decide if we want to grow again.
And let me just quickly say something in response, because I really want people to understand. Even the late Michael Jackson said, I'm looking at the man in the mirror. We all have a responsibility to make this work, to continue this church. Certainly, I believe in a collective of working together. But you have to ask yourself, what are you doing when you stand in that mirror every morning? Because you're not looking at all of us, you're looking at yourself. I have to do the same thing.
Yeah.
The burden doesn't just fall on us. The burden falls on you as well, on all of us. It's not we come, we go. You know, we do. You'll get a new bishop. Every 4 years, or maybe every 8 or 12, or however it works. But I'm just saying that that burden of responsibility also is on your shoulders. And you've got to step up to the plate.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Bishops. Dr. Mike Bowie, Strengthening the Black Church for the 21st Century, National Executive Director. And you all said a lot of great things. I agree with 99% of them. But I was really appalled when we have churches who disaffiliated and less than 5% have been black churches. Am I correct? I've done my research. Facts don't lie. We've been here since 77? Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, they started AME. Christmas conference, they asked the question, is slavery illegal or immoral or evil? The answer was yes, yes, and yes, and we still stayed. 1939, we intentionally did a segregated place, so we're united or untied, but we're still here. Leadership crosses every boundary and color, from urban, suburban, rural, black, white, pink, polka dot, and brown. But as the National Executive Director, who I can put my resume against anybody in leadership. Dr. Millie said it best, to not invest in the black church takes me back to May 25th when George Perry Floyd took his last breath, and there was a big campaign dismantling racism. And my question is, Bishop, to not invest in the black church, could it be that that's perpetuating that which we're not dismantling? So to not invest in us, yeah, we've had some bumps along the way. Like many white churches, we've invested more in white churches than black churches. I've done my research, but we get penalized. But y'all, we have a salient moment right now to invest in the black church. I got a plan. Please let me come talk to you about the plan. But we have to start investing in things that bring about an ROI. We know our communities, but if you allow us to have contextualization, and I think about this, we have 6 people on my team with a budget of less than $500,000 a year. That's a slap in the face. And I'm not bitching or moaning, I'm being honest today. But if we're gonna be the church together, collaboration is the new economy. So we're talking about leadership development, church revitalization, engaging our community. I believe we can empower our pastors with relevant cutting-edge resources that can take everybody to the next level. And I love the church, but I've been saying, man, it's amazing. When I was in seminary, I'm like, when I heard about the stuff we've gone through as Black United Methodists, I said, Lord, why am I still here? And before Bishop Sharma Lewis and I, we used to go to conferences and we would talk about changing the world. And I'm so glad God is using her. But as I stand in this position, I'm wondering, is our presence still validated? Think about this. We've been tolerated. But when are we going to start being celebrated as black people? If we're not celebrated, we're going to have this thing called learned helplessness, Bishop Carter. And learned helplessness is something that affects all people. So maybe what we're feeling right now is a sense of helplessness, but if the episcopacy doesn't say, you know what, not only do we have your back, but we're going to try it again because it's something called grace that we all need. What would it look like if we said we're going to invest in some of our black churches because the black churches really kept this denomination together? Kirby John Caldwell had the largest church, and they couldn't wait till resurrection came behind it. But it's something about what we bring, bishops, to this denomination. We bring a fervor. Talking about resilience, we created resilience from 1619. We know what it means to make it happen. But to not invest in us, and we're talking about dismantling. When I hear anti-racism, I laugh at that. Because we should be at the table, not talking about it, but helping the people get past those isms. So we got to get real, y'all. We have to get real with ourselves. So my question is, how can you partner with us, SBC 21? I got a plan. Is it perfect? No. Are we perfect? No. But I do believe it's time to move the needle. And if we got all this money from disaffiliation, and y'all, we hadn't got a dime, that's embarrassing. And Bishop Dees, when you said that, I mean, I couldn't keep, I said, I gotta say something. That's
Let me say something because, Dr. Bowie, you were, when I did the Black Church Summit.
Yes, last year.
In Florence, South Carolina, before
Yes.
election.
Yes.
I proposed a whole lot to the Black church. You were present.
Yes, ma'am.
The bishop was present, of what they could do to turn their churches around. We talked about how they declined. We talked about opportunities that churches have right now. I'm talking about specifically Black churches. You have a remnant here.
Yes.
That there is one, the entrepreneurial spirit
Yes.
is what we need in our pastors.
Yes.
And we don't have that.
Yes. And one thing, Bishop, I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. And it's amazing how, what my thing is in closing, and I say this not as a plea, but as a declaration, please don't give up on the Black church. Because it'll be amazing when we stand before the Lord and we do all this stuff. And they say, did you invest in that brother who came out of the prison system? Did you empower that single Black mother who had to choose whether or not she was going to get groceries or child care? So I believe, y'all, it's time for us to really be radical followers of Jesus Christ and do things that impact the kingdom of God and make a dent and a difference. So I believe it's time for us to write a new song, y'all. And I believe you have the greatest people called Black people in this United Methodist Church. We stayed, and I hear the words of the late Bobby McLean. Reread the book, Black Methodist Church, Whither Thou Goest. And Bishop Fairley, the question he said, and I'm going to close on this, and they kept saying it, Reggie Lee, what shall we do with the Blacks? They've been saying this since the 1800s, and that's my question today. What are we going to do with the Black church?
Stewarded by the chaplaincy office to help discern and find that call. Many of them grew in their faith, grew in their leadership skills. They served on their campus, they served in the community, and I'm proud to say that today, 8 of them have gone on to United Methodist seminaries and graduated, and many of them are serving in the United Methodist Church. We can do this if we invest in our undergraduate institutions and catch them early. It works. I also stand to say that I think the United Methodist Church has a theology and a policy that is very marketable to the younger generation, but we don't market it well. We don't promote it well, and that's one of the reasons they're ignoring us. Some of us are more Baptist in our churches than we are Methodist, and I say that because I'm not a cradle Methodist. I started in the Baptist church, and I'm one of those perfectionists who said, if I'm coming in, I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. Try to do it correctly and got here and said, oh, y'all more Baptist than the people I came from. But I also stand to say that when I came into my position this year, I was asked to develop a vision, and I developed a 4-year strategic plan for multicultural ministries and for strengthening the Black church or the multicultural churches in North Alabama. And when I presented that plan, it became very evident very quickly that we didn't know how to work with a plan, to embrace a plan. There
I just wanted to,
Here, question.
he has a question.
I was just going to, based on what we've said and the remnant, and I heard Bishop Lewis talk about, yes, our churches still can grow. And Bishop Robert, I heard you talk about that remnant, and I know after disaffiliation, discipleship, is there a plan? And I want to share even more. My passion, my prayer is to be a part of a clergy laity collective to reach new people. So when we were in boot camp that the denomination paid for, I'm very appreciative of it. One of the first days, what they talked about, and pardon me if the language is offensive, was they say your number one goal, you got to put butts in the seats. In order to move the needle, you need money. You know how to get folks' attention in America with capitalistic society? It's money and numbers. Bring the people in and bring the numbers, you get everybody's attention. That's the real religion of America, money and numbers. I'm not going to go any further with that. I want to be a part of, and I'm asking, is there a plan to bring together pastors and laity that are concerned and ready to reach new people? The young brother said it best from Alabama. We have one of the best kept secrets. Our theology is one of the best kept secrets. And we keep going trying to do what everybody else is doing. And everyone else is doing what Wesley said do. See, Wesley got together with his pastors, like I do with the lay persons at Journey, and said, how many people have you prayed for this week? How many new people have you met? I'm a disciple of the late Bishop Cornelius Litton Henderson. He was our dean at Gammon Seminary. He would meet with us on Monday and say, fellas and ladies, but he said, boys and girls, he said, you got to write 3 new people every week and you got to visit 3. He said, if you don't write them and visit them during the week, they won't come see you on Sunday. And guess what? Look around. Look around. That's the model at Journey. Ain't nothing secretive here other than the food and the coffee. The preaching is mediocre. The choir's doggone good. But it's about relationships, meeting new people. The plan that I'm working on right now, here it is again. My prayer is to be a part of that group, bishops. And if I'm off base, then here again on how pastors spend their week. It's literally can be done. Creating a weekly schedule for pastors focused on recruiting new members, meeting new people, and growing the church. Because the South is growing. The people are here, they're just not in the Methodist church. They're not coming to us. But if you tell me, I'm a marketing major from the greatest institution in this state, South Carolina State University, has more Hall of Fame players than any other school in South Carolina, HBCU. My marketing class, if you tell me more is going out than coming in, I say we got a problem. And Bishop Lewis, I heard you say you lost half. So that means we got to go and get some more people. And they're out there. But the mentality of the pastors and the laity has to change. And it has to be an understanding that we all work on the Great Commission. We all work on commission. All work on commission. I want to be a part of that. In the last 15 years I have left before I'm eligible for retirement. Because I'm going to take it, amen. And so that's my question. Is there a plan? And what can we do to get? That's just my final question. And then I also want to announce, too, that lunch is ready, and it's very good, because y'all been very patient.
He ate already.
As we transition into lunch, I'm going to allow you all those 2-minute blurbs to end out if you want it. But, Bishop Fairley, I rode in the car, and we gathered at the house of Bishop Aday on almost a bi-weekly, bi-monthly occasion at 17 and 18 years old. There was always a day with persons exploring and inquiring in the ministry with Bishop Aday when he was here, and it was always full of a big group of young people with Bishop. I didn't choose where I went to college. Bishop Aday went into office and called the school and secured financial resources for me to go to college and to seminary. You know, he did that on a phone call. they asked me where I was going. I was going to Ohio and Hawaii and all kind of places. Bishop went in his office at a Meet the Bishop Day, called the school, arranged my financial aid, and then asked my mother to come in the office. They decided I was going to Methodist in Fayetteville, and life has been such. So I agree with you. We got to interact with the youngest Millie at their infancy age if we're going to have church. But that was just because I picked up the mic from George. 2 minutes each, if y'all want it. But lunch is here.
Pruning is a biblical principle, and we're going through a time of pruning as the church. We have to embrace it as a biblical principle. But if we remain the same after the pruning, we're in trouble. If we do the same thing over and over and over again and have not learnt anything or come up with a plan post the pruning, but I think there's part of us in a way that has to rejoice in the pruning that's taking place, even in the pain of it. But we cannot stay the same, and we cannot keep on doing the same things over and over and over again. This is a godly moment, I think, that God can use, Romans 8:28, to make something good if we will learn the lessons from pruning.
And my word sort of follows his. We're in a time where, again, as I said, it's the best time to be doing this work. I just hope we don't blow it. With the pruning that's happening, with the things that are going to have to change, the 7 deadliest words of any organization, we've always done it that way. Bishop, but they would also tell me, Leonard, you know, some of these people who are standing in the way got to move. They got to get out the way if the work is going to be done. So, I mean, I don't know if that's some of us in this room. Could be. But we got to get out of God's way. The best advice I ever was given was by another bishop. Bishop Ward told me, best thing you could do is learn how to get out of God's way. Some of us need to get out of God's way.
George, what I would like to answer your question, I also want to be a part of what you just said, clergy and laity collective, but we all both got to be able to work together. And I think another thing I want to say, the remnant, as we know, Jesus only took 12 to change the world. I think also sometimes we think that it has to be the massive, that it doesn't have to start with the massive. It can start with 1 or 2. I would also say this to you all. This has been rich for me. I'm like Ken, I always participate, but I'm listening and I'm writing because I want not only the Mississippi Conference, not only Virginia, but I want the United Methodist Church to grow again. I am a cradle Methodist, as they say, from birth, and learned a lot of skills in the church, a lot of experiences in the church. Brannon Chapel United Methodist Church in Statesboro, Georgia. And so I bless God. Also, I've said this before. We all know this. We're in a system. There's no perfect system. And if we think it is, it's not. I think also we must work together. Also in Mississippi, that has been brought to my attention as I'm new there in a year and a half, I now have areas, districts, that there are no Anglo presence, but there is an African American presence, Michael Bowie. And so I've said to our pastors when we came to South Carolina for the summit in May, this is an opportunity to seize the moment. Are you going to seize it?
George, I have a plan. It's, well, and it focuses on what do we do with the remnant, with African American churches that have stayed. And in the One Georgia Conference, that work is being done around assessing African American churches. And when we say assess, I'm talking about buildings, their structure, all of that. And Kia, raise your hand. Any of you can talk to Kia. She's one of our regional developers, and she's over the Black church in North Georgia. And so she's a part of that team as we seek to find ways to strengthen our churches. We've got to move our people from having a heart for building to having a heart for ministry. And when we can do that, then we can make some significant change. Because, and Sharma could probably attest to this because she's from North Georgia, just about 99% of every African American church in North Georgia was a former white church. And there's a trauma behind that as well. Not only that, when the buildings were turned over to the colored folk, they were already in disrepair, and you couldn't have asbestos, mold, and mildew. So there's parts of the church they can't even use. And so if we can get them moving their heart into the right place, then we can make some significant change. But in the interim, our job is to go in and assess these churches, look at where they are, and help them move towards a more faithful future. In conjunction with that, there's also the plan to create new faith communities, specifically around multiculturalism. Sending African American, Asian, and Hispanic pastors and ministers with lay people walking together in creating these. We're not sending in Lone Rangers. We're sending in teams. So the money that we have, that's where our investment is going. And then how do we help our existing African American churches to be strong if they're not willing to yoke with another church who probably has a better building? And we're better together, no longer being separated from each other, but being better together. So there is a plan. As a matter of fact, that stuff starts rolling out the first of the year.
I just want to say thank you for listening and for speaking. And just a couple of quick things. First, if you have a sense that X is not happening, or we are not investing in Y, or we never do Z, you came today thinking something like that about something, just find me as an individual. We are around a lot of places, and in many instances, things are happening. Investments are being made. We're just not very good at telling those stories. And that's only to say that we need to grow more of that. And then just what's going on in my head is there is profound suffering in this room. Amen? The last month, today's the 4th week, I've been around profound suffering in a geographical area. So I wondered whether to say this or not. I think I will. These are like two circles that almost don't overlap. Does that make sense? Geographically. And I believe there are historical reasons for that, and no one at fault. But one of the problems we have in this nation is that we have pitted these two groups against each other. People who have something to gain. I mean, the 7 western counties of North Carolina are the lowest per capita income in the state. people who have a lot to gain have pitted people against each other. And I just want to say how that I have heard underneath the words the suffering and the pain, and it's real, and it needs to be healed, as Bishop Deese said. That's part of what we're trying to do. Traumatized people are on a journey of healing, and so I'm not tying that up in a neat little bow. Right now, they're just the two worlds I'm living in, and I just want to honor both of them.
Can we thank our bishops for as they have done an excellent job, and I thank you all for being open and honest, and that's been powerful, very powerful. Thank you so much. Need to transition into our lunching. You all should have tickets. If someone doesn't have a ticket for a reason, I think we have a few extra tickets, or we'll allow you to buy tickets. But you can get tickets back here at the registration table. At this point, we're going to learn how we should progress to go and receive our meals. I've been asking something, and I keep forgetting it, but please do it now. If you're at a table and you've got a whole bunch of stuff and all gather around the table, please bust that table, because people will be coming to those tables to eat. Amen? Amen. Thank you so much.